My name is Ruggero Maria Santilli. A DVD on my curriculum is available in the web if you search under my name. I am an applied mathematician, a theoretical physicist, and also theoretical chemist. Those are my personal specialties. I've been a member of the faculty of the University of Florida in Miami, Boston University, MIT, and Harvard, and I'm now the president of the Institute for Basic Research, as well as chief scientist of Magna Gas Corporation. The primary aim of our company is the manufacturing of new equipment that we call refineries. Refineries that essentially gasify various liquid waste into a fuel that we call Magna Gas. And this fuel has a very special feature from an environmental viewpoint, because it has no contaminants in the exhaust. It's a new fuel that emits full combustion. Yes, the primary novelty of our technology rests in the new chemical species composing Magna Gas. The name Magna Gas originates from a new form of putting together atoms, which are called magnecule, as compared to the conventional and preceding way of putting atoms together by the valence bond that are known as molecule. All conventional fuels such as gasoline and diesel, etc., or natural gas, they have what's called a molecular structure. Our gas instead has a molecular structure. The novelty is that the bond of the atom is intentionally weaker than the bond in existing fuel as a condition to achieve full combustion. The next important novelty of our technology is that our refinery are essentially small as a footprint, a little bit bigger than a truck, and therefore can be located anywhere desired and produce fuel anytime desired. Indeed, this technology, I conceived this kind of technology from day one to allow America to achieve fuel independence, which can be achieved only if we do it at the grassroots level.
Let me begin by stating the obvious, namely that the entire science of the 20th century has been dominated by one name and one name only, namely by Albert Einstein. And this dominance has been, of course, for very good reason. Indeed, I have often stated in my work that special relativity has a majestic axiomatic structure, as well as a truly impressive body of experimental verification. And so I don't have to remind to my colleagues the beauty, validity of special relativity at this time. Also allow me to remind the power of the name Albert Einstein, because it can be illustrated by remembering the experimental verification of the energy equivalency, the famous equation E equals mc squared, via the atomic bomb. And so therefore it is understandable that the entire scientific community has been really dominated by the power of this colossal scientist of the 20th century. However, all energy and fuels that could be identified with Einstein theory were all well known by the middle of the 20th century, and they were known to be environmentally unacceptable or insufficient or had environmental problem, because they either released harmful radiation or they release harmful radioactive waste, or for other environmental reasons. So it is known by technicians that expert in the field that the only possibility for mankind to really come up with fundamentally new, clean energy and fuels, the only possibility is to surpass Einstein theory. If we remain stagnant in the 20th century theory, then, as we will see, that we can really endanger the future of our planet. As we'll enter today in a conceptual basis, and then in the following level by a presentation by other scientists, you will see the concrete illustration of this statement by quantitative treatment and experiments. So we have a scientific duty to address the special relativity in an objective way. And the only objective way is essentially the following. We have to identify the conditions under which special relativity is exactly valid. And secondly, we have to identify the condition under which special relativity is only approximately valid. Because any theory, no matter how beautiful it is at a given time, every theory has limitations. This is extremely well known throughout the history of mankind, and it is also the fate of special relativity. Einstein himself says that Galilei relativity is valid at low speed, so it has limitation. At higher speed, my theory, Einstein said, is better. But the fate of this limitation now falls on Einstein himself. It is our duty to identify those conditions in which the special relativity is only approximately valid. And finally, we have to identify conditions under which the special relativity is inapplicable. Namely, those conditions are so far away from the condition of the original conception of special relativity that there is no scientific process that you can extract, no matter how you introduce into the equation arbitrary function that then you fit from the experimental data and then you claim special relativity to be valid, a process rather often occurred, unfortunately, throughout particle physics and other physics another physics segment of the second century. So basically in this lecture what we will do, we will have a conceptual presentation of the level 1 of the aspect 1, 2, and 3. We will review the objection. Each of those three level of analysis has its own objection. If we want to implement scientific democracy, we must review the objection. We will in all level. And finally, it is our ethical duty to present or at least briefly indicate the societal implication of this type of study. Very well. Let's. Incidentally, all technical references of this lecture are available in free PDF download in the adjoining document that you can just click and then click on various links, and you have all the references in free PDF download. Okay, let's get started then. Let's begin by identifying the condition of exact validity of special relativity. This identification is very easy. And those conditions are the original conditions stated by Einstein. They were historically called identified as exterior dynamical condition or exterior dynamical problem, and they essentially consist of point particles and electromagnetic waves propagating in empty space, propagating in vacuum. I have to make a sharp distinction here between the original writing by Albert Einstein and the writing by Einstein followers. It's a distinction that I have to make several times during this lecture as well as in subsequent lecture, because if you look at the same condition in Einstein followers, you see difference. You see a universal applicability under whatever condition exists in the universe. And then under this type of statement, we essentially exit from a true scientific process, and we enter into academia aims, essentially. Well, here I have to present the Jovian system as an illustration of the condition of exact validity of special relativity. Because I am of Italian origin and education, I am an American citizen, of course, now, and I'm speaking as an American citizen, and indeed I have an American flag here I carry it with me very often. And being of Italian origin and education, I had to present the Jovian system because it was first seen by human eye by Galilei, who invented the telescope and saw the Jovian system. The Jovian system, of course, not this view, but he did see. He was the first man who saw a planetary system. Special relativity is ideally suited for an exact representation of planetary system, as it is the case for Galilei's relativity. Why? Because the central symmetry of special relativity, which is the Poincare symmetry, or the central symmetry of Galilei relativity, which is the Galilei symmetry, they were conceived, developed, and known to apply for Keplerian system. Keplerian system are a number of massive point bodies that orbit around a heavier center, orbit in vacuum, without collision, careful, orbit in vacuum without collision around the heavier center, which is called the Keplerian center. In this case, Jupiter is the Keplerian system of the Jovian system, and the other are essentially planets orbiting around. The reason, in any case, as I said, is an obvious statement, this exact validity, because it is important to remember and note the unbelievable precision according to which NASA, and Russia, and China, and now Europe, all the mankind sends probe at billions of kilometers distance far away from Earth with an unbelievable precision. This is evidence, indeed, that Galilean relativity, Newtonian mechanics, and special relativity, if we are talking about high speed, then are indeed unbelievably exact. However, as it is the case for all aspects in science, the special relativity has been the subject of very severe criticism since its inception in 1915. We cannot ignore those, otherwise we don't implement scientific democracy. We enter into theology, essentially scientific theology. Well, first we should remember that as experts in the field are expected to know, to qualify as such, that Michelson-Morley, there are a number of papers in Referee Journal claiming that the Michelson-Morley experiment is flawed or incomplete or whatever. So it is still an open issue. Why? Because the Michelson-Morley experiment has not been repeated with contemporary instrument, and the controversy will persist until that experiment is indeed redone, and the issue is settled experimentally rather than by collegial authority, which is very debatable as a principle. Secondly, the notion of Einstein simultaneity has been the subject of controversy, and continues to be. Additionally, I only quote 5 out of many. Additionally, there is very credible evidence that the speed of light is not constant for accelerated frames along a straight line. I repeat, speed of light is not expected to be constant for accelerated frames along a straight line, which means colleagues cannot jump to general relativity because there is no curvature, and any applicability of general relativity and Riemannian geometry will be essentially political. Finally, I have dedicated myself a few years of research when I was at Boston University teaching physics and mathematics at all levels, from prep courses all the way to postgraduate seminar courses in advanced applied mathematical topics. I worked with Jacques Agassi and Paul Roman and ask ourselves the issue, is the Poincaré symmetry the only space-time symmetry in flat space, or there are alternatives? And the answer, we came up with an alternative, which is called Agassi, Roman, Santilli relativistic Galilei group. This was in 1974. 30 years and more have passed, and of course the issue is far from being completed. Indeed, there are a number of very distinguished scientists who are still studying this symmetry. Just to mention a few names, my friend, I'm honored by his friendship, Larry Horwitz at Tel Aviv University, has been seriously looking at this symmetry. John Franke of the International Association of Relativistic Dynamics has written papers. Wilhelm and a number of others authors have indeed written papers. But here is, however, the important statement of we need a rock in which to build all those 5 levels of scientific, technical, mathematics, physics, and chemistry. And our rock is special relativity. So throughout all this lecture, at least for my lectures, I will assume special relativity to be exactly valid under the conditions stated by Einstein, namely for point particle electromagnetic waves propagating in vacuum. In any case, it's a pragmatic assumption because it works. We know that the Lorentz symmetry works extremely well with extreme precision when we have particles are being accelerated in accelerator at CERN, Fermilab, and so on. Since it works, that's good enough for us. In any case, all the mathematics and physics and chemistry that we will be working and presenting will apply with very little modification to an alternative symmetry that future physicists may identify, such as the Agassiz-Roman Santilli relativistic Galilei. The application is just very, very simple. So from now on, I will assume special relativity to be exactly valid in vacuum. Okay, now let's pass now to the second important question. Under what condition special relativity is only approximately valid? Or alternatively, do we have sufficient evidence to even consider that special relativity may be approximately valid? Yes, the answer is absolutely yes. There are many. In 50 years, we had an accumulation of mathematical, physical, chemical, experimental, industrial, and other evidence according to which special relativity cannot be valid for the so-called interior dynamical problem, such as the structure of Jupiter itself. And we are talking about what type of system are those? Those are talking about extended, therefore deformable particles and electromagnetic waves propagating within a physical medium. Think about light propagating in our atmosphere, or think about the atoms of Jupiter's that they propagate through another medium. But and many other systems that are now this approximate character of special relativity in interior physical, in interior dynamical problem is crucial for the prediction and quantitative treatment of new clean energies and fuels. So therefore, if we ignore scientific analysis of the limitation of special relativity, certainly we can get chairs and all sorts of grants and maybe big prizes, but the issue persists. Do we serve really society, or we abuse society for personal aims? So there is an ethical duty underlining this issue. Ladies and gentlemen, let me begin this second introductory lecture with an obvious statement. Namely, that advances and discoveries that have been permitted by quantum mechanics throughout the 20th century are simply astonishing, are beyond belief. I have written several times in my works that quantum mechanics has a majestic axiomatic structure and an impressive body of experimental verification. I would like to add that, as a personal note, that the discovery, the construction, and the verification of quantum mechanics is simply incredible, because an entire body of new knowledge has been built by the master of the 20th century, such as Heisenberg, Schrödinger, Bohr, and so many others, that they build a new mathematical structure, a complementary, compatible mechanics, new experimental setups. All this construction has been discovered by the human mind for something that we will never see, the atomic structure. And this is simply unbelievable. And then when you see the experimental verification, then everybody remains astonished. That has been the only word I can use when I discovered all this during my PhD studies at University of Torino back in the early 1960s. Very well. I shall also mention that this lecture and this title should be elaborated. I'm more technical. I am referring to the limitations of the 20th century mathematical formulation of quantum mechanics, and not to the axioms of quantum mechanics that, again, they are majestic in my view. In fact, the covering hadronic mechanics has been, by conception and technical implementation, has been based on the axiom of quantum mechanics, of course, in an abstract formulation. And we have merely replaced the 20th century mathematics of quantum mechanics with a broader mathematics verifying, however, the same axioms in a different ways. Ladies and gentlemen, when there are limitations in physics, in the 99% of the cases that I know, those limitations refer to the mathematics. Rarely the physics takes part. This will be systematically the case throughout this lecture, because it will be the same for interior problem, the same for antimatter, the same of interior gravitation, etc., etc. The mathematics used on the 20th century is insufficient for addressing this rather complex conditions of nature. So, but after having said all this, it is set in history, as it has been also recalled by our chairman, John Pace, that all physical theories have limitations. So there are conditions under which they are exactly valid, but there are broader conditions under which they are merely approximately valid. And in general, there are further more complex conditions in which the 20th century theory are inapplicable. Namely, they provide no quantitative results. This is the study of those three possibilities is the main objective of this lecture. But before starting, I would like to make the following comment, that out of my lecturing around the world, for this particular lecture, I have selected in the introductory part, as you may have seen, the atomium in Brussels. Why the atomium? Well, because the atomium symbolizes the apotheosis of quantum mechanics. Just the sheer size of the atomium is an appropriate illustration of the dimension of quantum mechanics in history. Keep in mind throughout this lecture that we maintain the axiom of quantum mechanics. We are only talking about realization. Okay, with this understanding, let's start the lecture. So, first of all, let's see at the mathematical structure of quantum mechanics, because again, the mathematics sets the conditions of applicability and those of only approximate character. The mathematics is well known, only it is not properly addressed and identified in PhD courses because of unfortunate organized interest on Einstein's special relativity and relativistic quantum mechanics that have to be denounced, because they usually oppose the content of this lecture. They have opposed through decades, as it is well known in any case. They oppose not via technical objections published in referee journals. No. They oppose it via manipulation, abuse of academic authority, all performed under generally under public financial support. This type of behavior is not scientific and has to be denounced. Otherwise, I become an accomplice, something it will never happen for me. Why such strong words? Ladies and gentlemen, because the lecture that I initiate today has very deep implications for our little planet. As it is known to everybody, we are now experiencing increasingly alarming environmental problems. The only solutions of those problems is to discover basically new and clean fuels and energies. This is well known. Now, what is also well known but not spoken, and I don't want to be part of that silence, is that all energy and fuels that could be conceived by Einstein's special relativity and quantum mechanics were all fully known by the middle of the past century. And they resulted all in being environmentally unacceptable, either because of the release of harmful radiation or because of the release of radioactive waste. So therefore, the surpassing of quantum mechanics, the surpassing of Einstein's special relativity is mandatory for the very survival of our society, for the very survival of our little planet, navigating in this vast universe. So therefore, any non-technical objection, and that is, any objection which is not published in referee journals, which therefore is political, must be denounced. Otherwise, this due scientific process in the discovery and the development of new and the development of new clean energy will never acquire a sufficiently large collegial participation. Finally, it should be indicated that this process of conceiving, formulating, testing and developing new clean energy and fuel has already been developed. That's why it took 50 years to present, to reach the level of this world lecture series. And this available, has been published in referee journal. To understand them, however, you have to go through level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, and finally level 5, which is the experimental and industrial side. So therefore, to colleagues who are very quick in expressing obstruction and opposition, just keep in mind that in doing so, you oppose the due scientific process for new clean fuels and energy. That's what it is. And that's what has to be stated. Very well. After a clear understanding that the objection to this lecture have to be published in referee journal rather than voiced in academic corridors, okay, then let's begin the lecture. Let's have reviewed again the obvious, the mathematical structure of quantum mechanics, but review it from a critical viewpoint, not with a applaudatory viewpoint. First of all, the mathematics underlying quantum mechanics is linear. It is well known, taught first year graduate student. It is based on the theory of linear operator on a Hilbert space. The validity of this theory for numerous systems in nature is beyond doubt. This is not the issue here. However, the issue is that any belief that the entire universe can be described with a linear theory, ladies and gentlemen, is corruption and has to be denounced as such, because it's against the pursuit of new knowledge, period. And I want to be on record with those words, because if you use nice words to describe political handling of science, this may appear complicity to a number of serious scholars. Ladies and gentlemen, let me begin this third introductory lecture also with an obvious statement, namely that the achievement reached by quantum chemistry throughout the 20th century are simply astonishing, of an obvious historical proportion. And they've been so diversified to virtually enter in our everyday life. Everything that we touch nowadays is a result of magnificent discovery by the chemists of the 20th century. After having said so, it is my duty and my conviction that I have to bring to the attention of my colleagues that we are far from achieving final chemical knowledge. Therefore, to push forward, to identify the next step in the scientific evolution of our notion in chemistry, we have to identify the limitations of the basic theory used in the 20th century chemistry, which is quantum chemistry. Now, the moment I mention the limitations of quantum chemistry, a number of fellow chemists, they feel offended. And such as, the hint being that they feel like their discovery are kind of demeaned. No, my intent is the opposite. My intent is instead to indicate that that fantastic, outstanding discoveries were made by chemists throughout the 20th century, despite the limitations of the basic theory, which is quantum chemistry. Being an applied mathematician and a particle physicist by inspiration, I can also tell that quantum mechanics has been immensely more helpful to particle physicists than quantum chemistry. Quantum chemistry has been helpful to chemists. So rather than offending any fellow chemist, no, I want to emphasize the power of their intuition of achieving such monumental discoveries without a quantitative underlying process. Now, after having said so, I have a strong statement to make. It is my personal opinion. I do not expect fellow scientists to agree. Allow me to express it for whatever its value. It is after studying the issue for some 50 years, it is my deep and documented belief that quantum chemistry is nowhere exactly valid in the chemical world. Let me repeat this strong statement. while, as I indicated, special relativity is exactly valid under certain conditions, those were stated by Einstein, not Einstein followers. Similarly, the case quantum mechanics is exactly valid on the conditions stated by Dirac, Heisenberg, Schrödinger, the founders, not the followers, etc. So there are conditions of exact validity. It is my opinion that there exist no conditions in the chemical world for which quantum chemistry is exactly valid. This is the main objective of this lecture, so give me a chance to illustrate my point, hoping that, that this will initiate a scientific debate, which means with publications in referee journals. Everything that I have to say has been published in referee journals, and I encourage opposing views. Also, everything I have to say is available in free PDF download in the World Lecture Series in the section for Lecture 1C. Very well, I have organized this lecture into 5 different parts. Parts 1, I would like to identify the limitation of quantum chemistry for the molecular bonds, for the valence bond. Part 2, I would like to identify the limitation of quantum chemistry for the representation of molecular binding energies. Then I would like to identify in the part 3 the limitation of quantum chemistry for chemical reactions, which is a central topic of this entire series of lectures. Then I would like to identify the limitation of quantum chemistry for living organisms. And finally, I would like to close this lecture with a few remarks regarding the limitations, which are substantial, of available analytic equipment. Very well, let's get started with part 1. Dear ladies and gentlemen, again I have to start with a strong statement. I beg you for leniency. I am not expecting you agree, but at least consider my 50 years of meditation and thinking on the subject. The strong statement is that I have never accepted the 20th century notion of valence, beginning from my studies in the PhD courses at University of Torino in the mid-60s. And the reason is that I consider the 20th century notion of a valence a pure nomenclature without a quantitative scientific background. Let me make the statement. I consider the notion of a valence or molecular bond, according to quantum chemistry, pure nomenclature without quantitative scientific background. Why so? Well, because for me, for a notion of a valence to be really quantitative, first of all, I need the equation that represents the attractive force between valence electron pairs or valence electrons orbiter. I need the equation that identifies the force. Until the equation is identified, my entire conception of a scientific process is like missing the foundation. After identifying the equation, this quantitative treatment has to prove that that force is attractive. Now, keep in mind, we're talking about identical electrons. Identical electrons repel each other according to quantum mechanics. So you start to see the difficulties for passing from a nomenclature to a quantitative scientific process. And finally, the 1 and 2 are not enough. After proving the existence of an attractive forces with equation and proving that it is attractive, that quantitative process has to be in agreement with the experiments. The solutions, or at least a preliminary solution of those quantitative issues, has been a primary motivation for building new mathematics and then building a new physics, hadronic mechanics, and then passing only at the end of this long process, passing to build a covering of quantum chemistry known as hadronic chemistry. Notice that quantum chemistry was built only after first the mathematics of quantum mechanics, Hilbert space, etc. And then quantum mechanics had to be built, and then quantum chemistry could be conceived. Well, we had to repeat the entire process. That's why it took, ladies and gentlemen, it took decades. However, this process has been completed now and is available, published in referee journal, books all over, in all developed countries, available for all young minds with a minimum of scientific curiosity. To begin, let me bring your attention on the mystery of the valence bond. For this reason, I have selected in the introductory part of this lecture, as you may have seen, a view of the temples in the Far East that gives precisely an impression of mystery to us from the Western world. I also selected an appropriate music by Albinoni to illustrate and again to convey this sense of mystery. Why mystery? Well, this is an hydrogen atom. The hydrogen atom is a perfect sphere, as we know. Perfect sphere because of rotation due to temperature, also as well known. The point is that all total electromagnetic characteristics of these atoms are zero. The total charge is zero, total electromagnetic and magnetic, everything is zero. So the big mystery, how nature makes the miracle of bonding together two hydrogen atoms very tightly, because the binding energy of a hydrogen molecule is 110,000 kilocalories per mole. It's very substantial. So how this miracle is done? Well, this is a very deep question, which is at the very foundation of quantum mechanics. Has been unable to solve it in any quantitative way, in my knowledge. So therefore, hadronic mechanics addressed this issue and is a central topic of research for us. Basically, in view of this mystery, the notion of valence essentially correlated the electrons in a rather weak way. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the last lecture of level 1, which is dedicated to introductory lectures of this series. As such, this is the last lecture where I have an opportunity of making comments on regarding this unfortunate collapse of ethics in physics, because all the remaining lectures will be technically, mostly formula, and there is no room, or it will be appropriate in the other level 2, 3, 4, and 5 to consider ethical issues. Very well. So in this lecture, I intend to speak out my mind. For a very simple reason, because now, since I joined Harvard University in 1977 and announced under the support of the Department of Energy the initiation of research, technically known or epistemologically known beyond Einstein and quantum mechanics, I've been the victim of coordinated, organized, all sorts of harassment, the disruptions, the discreditation, vexations, and so on. And therefore, ladies and gentlemen, I intend to express my judgment with respect to the colleagues who are responsible for this type of scientific banditism by using exactly the same language. I can assure you, no more, but you can be sure, no less. Also, I was planning to have a nice lecture, technical lecture on technical aspect pertaining to the so-called quark conjecture and neutrino conjecture. But then our group discovered that those vexations, interference, and act of scientific banditism are continuing to this day. Let me give you an example, a very, very recent example. Today is March 21st. We have been victim of an act of real scientific banditism, consisting of the interference, outside interference, with the organization of a workshop on astrophysics and cosmology that we had been invited to organize at the Republic of San Marino in the Italian peninsula, and in the first week of September. And we have been informed that of a various interference that allegedly originated through have been organized and orchestrated by a group of physicists at CERN, and headed by the Jewish physicist Gabriele Veneziano. And at least this is the allegation, but from a rather credible source at CERN. to begin with, because we are friends at CERN too. And now you may remember the act of banditism perpetrated by Mr. Veneziano in 1992, in which he prohibited by his brothers and friends in various universities. He prohibited me to deliver lectures on experimental evidence that apparently at that time no longer indicated the limitations of quantum mechanics. There was a series of lectures that were prohibited. Now, since that act of banditism was done by Mr. Veneziano with with complete impunity, and I did not react, so he thought 9 years later, he said, I can do the same. That's what we suspect. Well, this time will not be the same. Indeed, the International Committee of Scientific Ethics and Accountability, now fully funded, has hired a specialized agency, investigative agency in Geneva, Switzerland, acting with branch also in Italy, to identify the documentation of the person responsible for this act of banditism. I can assure you that if we indeed succeed in identifying valuable documentation, the person responsible for this interference will be brought to justice. In any case, ladies and gentlemen, the first point I intend to make very clear: this interference on the pursuit of new knowledge via act of sheer banditism has got to stop and will be stopped. It will be stopped, not only by myself, now by scientists, outrageous scientists all over the world. Mr. Veneziano, his colleagues, are welcome to publish their opposing view in referee journals, because all our statements are published in referee journals. If he hasn't got any technical argument to oppose our dissident view with respect to his beliefs, Mr. Veneziano and his friends it's better to shut up, because the damage that he will inflict to himself, to CERN, and these ethnic groups are now very substantial. So it's better think it over. From now on, any interference will be very aggressively investigated and brought to justice if the elements emerge. Again, I was planning to have a nice technical lectures on quarks and neutrino, but this recent episode changed completely my mind. I am now in a visible state of agitation. We were forced during this weekend to change the website and remove the Republic of San Marino from the announcement. And the announcement has now been sent all over the world without any affiliation whatsoever. The affiliation will be kept secret. We have reached a point in keeping our scientific meeting attended by distinguished scientists the world over to keep the location secret because of act of banditism by people who know that they have no other way of behaving, certainly not without a shadow of dignity and science. Very well, ladies and gentlemen, this is the organization of this meeting. First, it is my duty to bring to your attention the implications of this lecture, namely that the doubts on the existence of quarks and neutrinos as physical particles, they have direct societal relevance. They imply new clean energy. This is very appropriate, especially now that Japan is suffering this enormous radiation disaster. After identifying the implication in advance, so that you understand the rest of it, people in good faith, then I will pass to the litany of objection against the conjecture that quarks are physical particles in our space-time. In part 3, I will review the litany of objections against the conjecture that the plethora of different neutrinos are indeed physical particles in our website. In part 4, I have asked my wife to present her view on this global collapse of ethics. I had to insist because she did not want to be part, but finally she accepted. I think she has to express her view because she has shared with me the aggravations, the accusations, and all sorts of act without human dignity. Being a lady, she will put a little grace in an otherwise rather, let's be straight, putrescent situation of science on a worldwide basis. Also, being a clinical social worker, she can express the problem of scientific ethics and the possible solutions, not only with grace, as I said, but also with professional insight. Finally, I've been requested by many colleagues all over the world to present my view on how restore scientific democracy in our society. And I will do this in part 5, by identifying with clarity, to avoid the farce, the origin of the problem, and submit very humbly my recommendation. I want to have them on record, of course, with no expectation that they will be seriously considered, let alone implemented. But that's the very reason why I want them on record. Very well, let's get started with part 1. Okay, let me state up front what is my position on quark conjecture. My position is identical to that of the originators of quark theory, Murray-Gell-Mann, the Nobel Prize, Murray-Gell-Mann. And this, and in my words, can be essentially stated as follows. Number one, I consider, as by following Nobel Prize Gell-Mann, the so-called SU3 classification of hadron subsequently became SU3 color, and then the so-called standard model. I consider this classification as being excellent. Careful word classification. We are talking about Mendeleev type classification of hadron into family. It works. It has proved through the decades to predict new hadron exactly as the Mendeleev table of atoms predicted new atoms that they were then discovered. This is evidence that it worked. I mean, somebody may think that can be improved. I have no interest. It works so well. I have no interest of any improvement whatsoever. Ladies and gentlemen, as stated by our chairman, John Pace, this is the most difficult lecture of this series. So therefore, I had to select an appropriate location where to deliver this lecture. Let me state very bluntly that to deliver a lecture on the limitation of Einstein's general relativity in any qualified academic institution in the United States of America or most of Europe is totally outside reality, as it will be documented progressively throughout this lecture. So I had to select a receptive environment. Among a number of very receptive countries, such as Greece, that is very open to basic knowledge, I selected Egypt because of my attachment and my love of Egyptian ancient civilization. You may have seen the view of the Luxor temple in the introductory part. However, look at the date. This is January 29. We initiated the lecture jointly with the initiation of the Egyptian Revolution. And indeed, the Luxor temple was empty, as you may have seen, while in reality it's full of thousands and thousands of tourists. The reason it was empty because there were military tanks patrolling the streets nearby. To make a long story short, we were evacuated by the Belgian government because our flight originated from Brussels. We were treated by the Belgian government with white gloves and 5-star hotels and things like that. I want to say thanks to the Belgian government. It was really a privilege to be part of their action. But as a result of all this, the lecture had to be restarted and we had to redo completely in the United States of America, and in particular in Florida. Well, let me begin by stating the obvious. Albert Einstein has entered in the history of science for many reasons. An additional reason is that he has been the first to initiate a geometric study of gravitation. Additionally, he selected a geometry, the Riemannian geometry, which is simply fascinating, and this has a mathematical beauty that is undeniable. as proven by the fact that Einstein's general relativity and gravitation have attracted a large number of pure mathematicians, applied mathematicians, and theoretical physicists, including myself. And this has been going on for close to a century, 96 years to be exact. After having said so, I have to make a blunt statement. After studying for 50 years the consistency and the various aspects of general relativity and in general, and Einstein's conception of gravitation in particular, my conclusion is that those theories are fundamentally flawed, and they have an unresolvable basic inconsistency, insufficiency, and shortcomings. I've tried for years to resolve the problems that we will be addressing during this lecture and fail. You reach a point in which we have, as a scientist, we have to admit the truth to the best of our knowledge. Okay, at that point, as it is also known, I have been dubbed with all sorts of names this, what I'm about to say is fringe science and so on. There was also an editor when I published papers of appraising the limitations of Einstein's general relativity. There was an editor, I have never heard his name, who felt compelled to send long email all over the academic world, claiming Santilli is a nuclear physicist. Of course, I've written a number of papers in nuclear physics, but I'm an applied mathematician. And then the theorems that you will see in a moment, in a few moments, the theorems were disproved by a tangential epistemological and philosophical aspect. So let me make another blunt statement to people such as these unmentionable editors. I have been, for several years, a member of the Department of Mathematics of Harvard University under several grants from the Department of Energy. Therefore, I am fully qualified to express a judgment on the Riemannian geometry as well as on general relativity and Einstein's conception of gravitation. Needless to say, I'm not expecting you to agree. This is not the issue. It's a question that I am sufficiently qualified, so therefore my objection, published in an independent, severely refereed journal, should be considered if we don't want to pass the boundary from science into politics. Very well. Let's begin with an analysis of the most fundamental insufficiency. Those are not inconsistencies, insufficiency and of Einstein general relativity. The first one is that after 1 century of attempt in the river of public money, it has been impossible to identify a quantum version of gravitation. We now know the technical reason for, because the Riemannian geometry is necessarily a non-canonical instruction, since it is a deformation of the Minkowski geometry. So therefore, any operator image of Einstein gravitation must necessarily be non-unitary. The non-unitary quantum theories are known to be catastrophically inconsistent when formulated with the mathematics of unitary theory, Hilbert spaces, etc. This catastrophic inconsistency are studied in details in lecture 2A, 2B, 3C, etc. So there's no point in reviewing them here. Nevertheless, this has been a major loss to science, namely the absence of at least an operator form of gravity. It is a major insufficiency that has to be kept in mind by physicists and observer in good faith. The next insufficiency is that also after close to a century of attempts, in reality were initiated by Albert Einstein himself, general relativity has prohibited any consistent grand unification of electroweak and gravitational interactions. We know nowadays that by following the historical conception of gravitation by Einstein, there is no hope whatsoever of achieving a consistent grand unification for many, many reasons. Just to flash a couple, the electroweak interactions are a magnificent theory verifying a symmetry, a universal symmetry, the Poincare symmetry. Gravitation has no symmetry, has a covariance. The moment you match a covariant theory with Poincare invariant theory, ladies and gentlemen, you have an horrendous minestrone that the outcome can only be catastrophically inconsistent. Also, the mixing of a theory formulated on a curved space, which is non-unitary, matched with the theory which is beautifully formulated on Minkowski space, you end up with another minestrone which has no realistic chances of success. The reason, technical reason for the failure actually is an impossibility of achieving a consistent, there are all sorts of political grand unified theory, but one that really can resist the test of time. It's impossible, and we know many, many technical reasons. Additional reason for fundamental limitation of Einstein gravitation is the complete absence of any even a possibility of formulating the gravitational field of antimatter. The reason is known, but not spoken in the best PhD courses, whether in Cambridge, USA, or in Cambridge, England. And the reason that the only conjugation in Einstein gravitation is that for the charge. But bodies, astrophysical bodies have to be assumed generally to be chargeless, to be neutral. Assuming they have a little charge, the contribution of little charge to the gravitational fields of a massive star, antimatter star, is zero, virtually zero. So therefore, it is an intrinsic insufficiency of the theory. Those problems have been addressed. I spent many decades of my life to try to attempt the resolution of those processes, of those insufficiency. I did achieve a preliminary solution, but I had to depart from Einstein gravitation. This is presented in this monograph, which has been published by Springer, one of the best publishers, scientific publisher of these days, and because I'm on the continuous accusation by equivocal scientists in gravitation, Santilli published his idea in a journal in which he is the editor-in-chief. This is not the case. That's more, before accepting this monograph, Springer studied, submitted to referee in 3 continents, and it was accepted with no modification. The study of this monograph, which is available as a free PDF download because no longer available in the original printed form, I believe is necessary for an understanding of the rest of this lecture. Well known. What are the historical objections that are unresolved? The first historical objection is that the bending of light is entirely of Newtonian character, to such an extent that there is no need whatsoever of introducing curvature for the representation of the bending of light. So the argument is essentially the following, that Newtonian gravitation is universal, is admitted by everybody to be universal. Once you admit the Newtonian gravitation is universal, you must also admit it attracts light. If for some reason the light escapes Newtonian attraction, ladies and gentlemen, we have to rewrite 4 centuries of science since the beginning with the historical script by Newton. Now, people says, oh, Dr. Santilli does not understand gravitation. That's what they normally do, because they don't have a technical argument, so they go into this step. So, and what they say is ludicrous, because they say, oh, but the Newtonian attraction is expressed in terms of masses, and light has no mass. Since the light has no mass, they say, therefore is not attracted, but is not part of Newtonian attraction. And this type of objection, when proffered by experts, they are indication of a very equivocal posturing. Why? Because it is well known by experts to qualify as such that the origin of the gravitational field is the energy and not the mass. Indeed, there is no mass momentum tensor. It doesn't exist. What the tensor exists is the energy momentum tensor. And that is the source of the gravitational fields in any decent level of treatment. So therefore, since the energy is the origin of the gravitational field, is part of the mechanism of attraction, I have always written Newton's equation in their identical form, no change whatsoever, in which I write the energy instead of the masses, and I rescale the gravitational constant. This is identical reformulation. But then the representation of the bending of light is trivial, because one of the two energies says the rest energy of Jupiter, and the other is the energy of a light beam, as you know, as everybody knows, is namely according to Einstein formula. So this point is this objection is very, very serious, because it goes at the very, very root of the conception of gravity as being characterized by an actual curvature of space, because it's established that there is no need of an actual, at least this is a very consistent treatment. It represents numerically the experimental evidence without curvature, actual curvature of space. As such, if we ignore it, ladies and gentlemen, we exit from science and we enter into politics. I'm not claiming necessarily that this argument is correct. Maybe it has some flaw on its own. That's not the point. The point is the suppression of debating this historical objection. So I challenge my colleagues at Princeton University, or at Cambridge, USA, or at Cambridge, England, to debate whether this is correct or false. And I challenge them jointly with the debate of other aspects that we'll see. If they do not want to debate, then I recommend them not to use public funds from the American taxpayer for personal theologies, because that will be a violation of our law, will be abuse of public funds. It's just that simple. Now, let's see what happens with the representation, with Einstein representation of the curvature of space. Ladies and gentlemen, it is based on a chain of assumptions. There are 7 independent assumptions to achieve indeed, and then after 7 assumptions, you do indeed achieve a representation of the bending of light with the curvature. Yes, you do at the end. But the problem is that each and every one of those assumptions is debatable, as you will see in the rest of this lecture. Let's start with the first assumption. Those are the basic equations of Einstein gravitation, representing the very essence of his conception of gravitation, namely the reduction of gravitation to pure curvature with no sources. Look at here on the right hand side, there is 0. And now immediately at this point, the equivocal physicists will say, oh, this Santilli does not understand, does not know that you can put on the right hand side, there are also source tensor on the right hand side when the body is charged. Ladies and gentlemen, when that objection is moved, it's equivocal. It's equivocal, because Einstein was Einstein. This we are talking about, for instance, the gravitational fields of the sun that has an enormous mass. The source tensor on the right hand side is for the potential charge of the sun. Let's assume that the sun is indeed charged and we can measure. But then, ladies and gentlemen, the contribution of the charge to the gravitational field of the sun is 10 to the minus 40. It's 0.0040 before you see a contribution. Just mentioning that there are in this argument that there are source terms due to the charge is corruption. Either it's total lack of any technical knowledge or it's corruption. This is what Einstein stated. The point, however, is that these equations are irreconcilably incompatible with the electromagnetic origin of the mass, demanding a first order, not 1 or 10 to the minus 40, a first order source tensor on the right hand side, as we will see in part 2. So the very basic assumption is fundamentally flawed and has not yet survived the test of time. But then you go to all the others. Then you have to select, a metric. This is you have a large variety. Look at this. It's even in contradiction with the Schwarzschild metric. It's just selected out among a large variety. And rather than this, I want to select another solution. And then with covariance, you have an infinite variety of line element you can select. And then after that, you have to select the geodesic. And then after that, you have to select this and this and that. After that, yes, indeed. After that, you represent curvature. But ladies and gentlemen, let's compare the power of the representation of the bending of light by Newtonian gravitation with this chain of assumption. There's no question in my mind that Newtonian representation is preferable because there is no assumption whatsoever. Everything is based on first principle without assumption. At this moment, the correct question is then why do we have to use curvature when Newton represents indeed exactly the experimental evidence of the bending of light? Immediately we'll say, because there is the 45 seconds of the perihelion Mercurium and other things, ladies and gentlemen. But we don't have to represent 45 seconds of perihelion. We have to introduce all sorts of a chain of continuous assumption and counter-assumption, each of which is debatable and actually has been disproved. And in any case, the 45 seconds of perihelion and other aspects have been represented by the theories in a Minkowski space, with an abyssal difference with the representation with Riemann, as we will see. Representation of those relativistic effects in Minkowski space without curvature is invariant over time because it possesses the Poincare symmetry. This has no invariance, it's a covariance. So the numerical prediction of 45 seconds is only a Polaroid picture, as we will see in a moment. In conclusion, I have to conclude, to the best of my knowledge, that the Newtonian gravitation is preferable to Einstein gravitation, to the best of my knowledge, at this first stage. But let's keep going. Another historical objection, also totally unaddressed, is that the curvature positively cannot allow the representation of a fundamental event in gravitation, which is the free fall of an object along a straight radial line. Here is the Tower of Pisa. Galileo went on the top. Of course, there was an historical test for not for gravitation, but for the gravitational constant. But in any case, already since Galileo, we can see the straight character. There is no possibility, ladies and gentlemen, to represent this event with the curved space. None. And at this point, immediately they tell, but we go into the geodesic, which is a radial line. Sure, but then, of course you do. But then you have to kill the curvature tensor. So you have to annul the curvature, which is precisely the objective. So this objection has to be matched with the preceding one that essentially established the profound doubts on the fact whether space is indeed actually curved. In other words, it may be possible that the Riemannian geometry, due to its magnificent beauty, can indeed represent gravitation in a very elegant way. But the fundamental point persists, is that it does not necessarily mean that the space is actually curved. Even though the representation is magnificent from a mathematical viewpoint, it does not mean that space is actually curved. Think in this way. Not only the bending of light, but the idea of a curvature is associated with the trajectory of planets around the sun. But that associating this trajectory with the curvature, ladies and gentlemen, is fundamentally flawed on any grounds and serious scientific grounds. That's basically Newtonian trajectory of equilibrium between the gravitational attraction and the centrifugal force due to rotation, positively, absolutely without any curvature of space whatsoever. Let's go to the next objection, the third out of a number of historical objections. I've selected only three. Namely, the fact that we have a weight. Look at me. I'm heavy. See, I'm attracted by the earth. And I feel this weight without moving. Without moving. Now, what is the problem? So what is the historical objection? Einstein gravitation cannot represent the weight of stationary bodies. This is essentially the objection, while Newtonian gravitation can. Ladies and gentlemen, I meditated on this for decades. I have to agree with the historical objection, and I found no possibility to represent this fundamental third additional gravitational point with Einstein gravitation. Now, again, it may well be that my knowledge is insufficient. It may well be that Einstein gravitation represents the phenomenon. Yes, this is not the issue at stake here. The issue which is at stake is the unaddressed, unresolved, which means profound disease, profound ethical problems in the entire scientific community on gravitation for one century, with the abuse of a river of money from the US taxpayer and taxpayers from other countries. The conclusion is that, to the best of my knowledge, in regards to those fundamental events, I have to prefer Newtonian gravitation to Einstein gravitation. At best, if there is need of correction, definitely I will prefer relativistic corrections, namely corrections or enlargement or formulation of gravity in the Minkowski space and not in the Riemannian space, for a variety of technical reasons that you will see throughout this lecture. Most importantly, the lack of an invariance. Minkowski gives you Poincaré. The number that you predict are invariant under the time evolution. With Riemann, you have covariance, which by very definition, the numbers that you predict are not preserved in time. So therefore, ladies and gentlemen, if I remain as being a physicist, I have to select the most plausible approach to the best of my knowledge and to the best of my capability. And that is abandoning the Riemannian formulation of gravity in favor of relativistic extension of the Newtonian gravitation, with understanding that Newtonian gravitation already represents the virtual entirety except for small relativistic corrections.